No one's going to write a book about sitting and having a coffee in the sun. But to me, that was just, when I think back on my time, like that sums up kind of the happiest periods of doing my PhD. My name's Hannah Telling. I studied a PhD in history at the University of Glasgow, and now I work as a research analyst at the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So I think what led me into the field of gender history actually was my undergrad. So I did my undergrad at the University of Glasgow, and I remember my third year took a course on gender and sexuality in early modern Europe, and I remember the first session just being like, what is this? Why have we never been taught this type of history before? From that point on, I was like, right, let's try and do this for as long as possible. But I've always, as well as being interested in gender, I've always been kind of interested, I would say, in some of like the darker aspects of human nature. So it felt kind of like a natural progression to kind of look down the crime routes and take a gendered approach to that. And often it wasn't a kind of like a planned kind of, I'd like to stay in academia. In many ways it was a job, but then in other ways it wasn't. It was just like, I'm getting to sit in an archive every day, looking at crime reports from 180 years ago. And I was just like, this was so interesting, so fascinating. I just wanted to do it for as long as possible. My PhD, I looked at the legal regulation of male violence from 1850 to 1914, which is a really interesting period in Scottish history. I was really interested in this kind of question of how violence was understood and how male violence in particular was understood, you know, and what were the things that shaped men's experience of justice before the courts, but also in the court of public opinion. So how the press viewed men, how wider society viewed men. And what I kind of found, some of the main things I found was it was often entirely dependent on what type of man that you were. Were you industrious, looked after your family, provided for your family, seen as a respectable member of society, or were you lazy, feckless, drunken? It also really depended on the type of victim as well and their behaviour. And we get a lot of ideas of, particularly when it was male violence directed towards women, what type of woman was she? Was she a good wife, a good victim, and therefore deserving of sympathy, or was she not? And therefore you see these kind of like really interesting questions coming in as to when was certain types of violence maybe not acceptable, but certainly more tolerable than in other spaces. The Centre for Gender History was great. It was absolutely fantastic. The main benefit of it was it wasn't hierarchical. You went along and you had a conversation on the same level. Like you went along to research events and your voice was valued, your perspective was valued, people were genuinely interested in what you said. In my 5-6 years I was at Glasgow doing my PhD and then doing 2 postdocs, the amount of different activities I did, it was staggering. Like you think you come along to do a PhD and to do a bit of writing, but actually before you know it, you're on the radio or you're organising a conference. You might not realise it at the time, but you're being trained up to be able to be really resilient to the kind of demands that a non-academic job might throw at you. I think we kind of live in a culture where sometimes the humanities in particular can be derided a little. You know, you should go to university and you should do something that's going to give you a job at the end of it. And I don't think it should just be about that. I actually think it's perfectly acceptable and should be lauded to go and do something because it is absolutely fascinating. You're incredibly interested in it. And it's not just about the PhD, it's about all the other opportunities. You may find that, say, a few years on from finishing a PhD, you go, as I did, I actually don't think I want to stay in academia anymore, I want to go do something different, that all of those experiences are going to be what you build on. So I currently work as a research manager, the Scotland research manager at the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So what we do is we try and eliminate discrimination through our actions, but what we're also trying to do is help encourage public bodies and others to also advance the quality of opportunity and also to foster good relations between groups who share protected characteristics. I'd say my key role is evidencing the issues. I think one of the key things that I've managed to help deliver on was our State of the Nation report. It's called the Equality and Human Rights Monitor, Is Scotland Fairer? And what this is that it assesses the state of progress on equality and human rights in Scotland, at least over the last 5 years, but sometimes going further back. So where has there been progress? Where has there been stagnation? And where have things actually regressed in terms of people's rights, but in terms of people's capacity to be able to do and be the people that they want to be. I started playing rugby 13 years ago. I recently retired, but I played rugby halfway through my undergrad, through my master's, through my PhD, through my postdocs, and actually into my current work. And I absolutely complemented each other. There's nothing like being dragged along on a cold, wet night, because they usually were cold and wet, to training, to go run around, chase after a ball, with 40 or 50 women who really don't care about that methodological question that you've got, or really don't care that you've accidentally deleted, half of your files that morning, or that you have a deadline the next week. Like, actually what they want to know is, can you catch a ball and can you tackle that person? So I think I would say absolutely have something else, because sometimes your academic research, I do think you should be looking at it like, this is almost like the work side of my job, but I also need to do other things too.